I stared at the pile of dishes in the sink, the laundry basket in the corner, and the scattered shoes by the door. It felt like my life was one big checklist of chores. Every day, it was the same routine: wake up, clean, cook, tidy up, repeat. I had tried to talk to Mark about it so many times, but he never seemed to get it. "Mark," I called from the kitchen, my voice strained from the weight of everything I had been carrying on my own for what felt like forever. "Can you at least help me with the dishes tonight?" He barely looked up from his phone, his face bathed in the blue light. In a minute, he mumbled, swiping through whatever it was that was holding his attention. I clenched my fists at my sides, trying to control the frustration bubbling inside me. I walked over to the couch, stood there for a moment, watching him. He didn't seem to notice. He never noticed. It was always me who had to do everything, always me who had to keep the house in order while he focused on his work or whatever else he deemed more important. I couldn't take it anymore. "Household chores are a form of oppression, you know," I blurted out before I could stop myself. He froze for a moment, a frown creasing his forehead. "What?" "Yeah," I continued, the words spilling out now. "It's like I'm stuck in this role, this endless cycle of cleaning up after everyone else while no one cares. I'm suffocated by it." Mark finally put his phone down, but instead of offering an apology or an understanding, his face turned defensive. "I work all day, you know. I can't do everything around here. You should be grateful I'm even doing as much as I do." "Grateful?" I snapped. "Grateful that you do the bare minimum? I'm here all day, trying to juggle work, the house, and the kids, and all I get in return is nothing. No appreciation, no help. You think it's easy for me to do everything? It feels like I'm being crushed under the weight of it all." Mark's eyes narrowed, his voice growing colder. "I'm tired too, okay? You don't think I'm tired? You don't think I want a break? You think you're the only one who's overwhelmed?" His words stung. Of course, I knew he was tired. We both were. But it didn't change the fact that I was doing everything, while he sat there, oblivious to how much I was carrying. It was as if he had no idea what it was like to be constantly running around, trying to keep everything together. "Maybe you should take some time to think about what you're actually contributing around here," I said, my voice shaking now. "I'm doing everything, and I'm still expected to smile and act like it's okay. It's not okay, Mark. It's not okay anymore." I could see the tension in his jaw, the frustration in his eyes, and for a moment, I wondered if maybe I had gone too far. But then I remembered all the nights I spent cleaning up after dinner, putting the kids to bed, and still trying to make time for him. It didn't feel fair, and for once, I wasn't going to pretend it did. There was a long silence between us. I felt my heart racing, but I didn't back down. He finally stood up, his voice low and tight. "Fine," he said, throwing his hands up in the air. "If you want to do everything by yourself, go ahead. I'm not going to beg you to help me." I froze. His words hit me like a slap in the face. What was he saying? Was he giving up? Was he throwing in the towel? "I never said that," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I just want you to see how hard it is. To see that I'm drowning here, and I can't do it all alone." Mark's gaze softened for a moment, but then it was gone, replaced by something else. "I don't know what you want from me. I work hard. I deserve to relax when I get home. And I don't?" I shot back, my frustration building again. "Do you think it's easy for me to be here all day? I don't get a break, Mark. I don't get to come home from work and just be." He looked away, his shoulders slumping. I could see the tiredness in his eyes, but it wasn't the exhaustion I was feeling. It was different, as if he was losing something, losing the connection we once had. The thought made my chest tighten. For a moment, we stood there in the silence, the weight of the argument hanging between us like an invisible barrier. I could feel the distance growing, creeping in like an unwelcome guest. "Maybe we should just sleep on it," Mark muttered after a while. "I'm too tired to talk about this anymore." "Yeah," I said, my voice hollow. "Maybe we should." He went to the bedroom without another word, leaving me standing in the living room, alone with my thoughts. As I turned back to the pile of dishes, I realized that everything had shifted. Our relationship, once filled with the promise of shared responsibilities and partnership, now felt strained, like a rubber band stretched too thin. Something had broken, and I wasn't sure if it could be fixed. I couldn't help but wonder if I had gone too far. Was it my fault? Had I pushed him away? Or had I just finally said what we both knew but never wanted to admit? The next few days felt like I was living in a fog. Mark became increasingly distant, as though he had retreated into a shell I couldn't reach. Every morning, he would leave for work without a word, and when he came home, he barely acknowledged me. The silence between us was suffocating, and it was starting to feel like we were two strangers sharing the same space. I went about my routine, doing the chores, cooking the meals, and cleaning the house. It was the same as always, only this time, the weight of it all felt heavier. I tried to talk to Mark, but every attempt seemed to fall flat. It was as if he was actively avoiding any conversation that might bring up the elephant in the room. Then, one evening, he came home later than usual. He had his phone in his hand, texting furiously. I didn't ask him where he had been. I didn't have to. I could see the way he looked at the screen, a distracted, almost guilty expression on his face. "Mark," I called out softly as I set down the dishes, "we need to talk." He didn't look up immediately, but when he finally did, his eyes were filled with a guarded emptiness. "Not now, okay? I'm tired." "I know you're tired, but we need to talk about this, about us," I pressed, my voice shaky with frustration. He sighed, dropping his keys on the kitchen counter. "I don't think there's anything left to talk about," he said, his voice flat. "You've made it clear how you feel. And I'm not the person you want me to be." His words hit me like a punch. I hadn't realized just how much distance had grown between us in such a short time. I wanted to argue, to make him see that I wasn't asking for perfection, just some recognition of what I was going through. But before I could speak, his phone buzzed again. He looked at the screen, his eyes lighting up. "Who is that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Just someone from work," he mumbled, already typing a response. It was Clara. I recognized the name immediately. She had been working with him for a few months, and although I had never met her, I had heard him mention her once or twice. He spoke about her with a strange fondness, the kind of tone he used when talking about things that truly mattered to him. The realization hit me like a cold wave. I had been so focused on the chores, on the endless cycle of housework, that I hadn't noticed what was really happening. Mark wasn't just withdrawing from me, he was turning to someone else for the connection and understanding that I couldn't give him anymore. I watched him for a moment, my heart sinking. He was no longer present in this relationship, not in the way I needed him to be. Clara had filled the void, the one that I had unknowingly created by constantly pushing him away with my frustrations. The silence between us stretched on, and I felt a knot tighten in my chest. "I see," I whispered, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "I see what's going on." Mark's gaze flickered to me briefly before he looked back at his phone. "What do you mean?" he asked, but there was no real curiosity in his voice. You're spending a lot of time with Clara, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I can tell she's important to you. He didn't deny it. Instead, he just shrugged, a gesture that felt like a knife to the heart. She listens to me, okay? She gets it. I don't have to explain myself to her. His words stung. I wanted to scream, to demand that he see what he was doing to our marriage. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, feeling the weight of everything we had lost. I'm not asking for you to be perfect, Mark, I said, my voice breaking. I just want you to see that I'm struggling too. But I stopped, unable to continue. He didn't seem to notice the hurt in my words. He just nodded and said, I need space, okay? I think I need some time to think about everything. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was asking for space? Was this it? Was this the end? Do you think that's going to fix things? I asked, my voice shaking with emotion. Do you think walking away from this will solve anything? He didn't answer me. Instead, he turned back to his phone, his focus now entirely on whatever conversation was happening on the other end. I felt invisible. Like a ghost, lingering in the background of his life while he moved forward with someone else. Fine, I said, my voice cold and distant. If that's what you need. I didn't wait for him to respond. I turned and walked away, retreating to the bedroom where I collapsed onto the bed. I didn't cry. I couldn't. But inside, I felt like something had shattered beyond repair. For the rest of the evening, Mark stayed in the living room, his presence like a heavy shadow that I couldn't escape. I could hear him laughing at something Clara had said over the phone. It was so easy for him to smile again, so easy for him to find comfort in someone else. I wondered if I had made a mistake. If I had pushed him away with my demands, with my constant dissatisfaction. Had I driven him into her arms? Or was this just something that was always going to happen? Something that had been brewing for far longer than I cared to admit? The truth was, I didn't know anymore. What I did know was that we were no longer the couple we had once been. The partnership, the connection, the love we had shared, it all seemed to be slipping through my fingers. And now, I was left wondering if I had even recognized what we had before it was gone. The days after that conversation with Mark were a blur. He became more distant, and I found myself caught between anger, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of loss. It wasn't just about the chores anymore. It wasn't just about the tension in our home. It was about something deeper, something I wasn't sure I was prepared to face. I spent my days in the quiet of the house, trying to keep myself busy with the same routines that had once been comforting. The laundry, the dishes, the vacuuming, the dusting, it all felt meaningless now. It was as though I was going through the motions of life, but nothing mattered. Nothing felt right. Mark hardly spoke to me. When he did, it was brief, almost mechanical. I tried to reach out, but each time I did, he withdrew further. It wasn't just the distance, it was the emptiness. I couldn't even remember the last time we had shared a real conversation, one that wasn't about household chores or the laundry list of things that needed to be done. We had lost the spark somewhere along the way, and I wasn't sure if it was still there to be found. I started to feel the weight of my own frustrations more and more. I had spent so much time believing that if I did enough, if I kept the house in perfect order, if I kept everything running smoothly, things would work themselves out. But they didn't. And now, all I was left with was the overwhelming sense that I had been so focused on the wrong things. I should have focused on us. On what we needed. On the things that really mattered. But I hadn't, and now Mark was slipping away from me. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. One evening, I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring out the window. The sun was setting, casting a soft golden light over the garden, and for a moment, everything felt so peaceful. But that peace was fleeting. My thoughts were consumed by Mark. I thought about Clara, about how he had turned to her, about how she seemed to understand him in ways I never had. It made me feel small, invisible, like I had failed him somehow. The door creaked behind me, and I turned to see Mark standing in the doorway. He had a tired expression on his face, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. But it was gone before I could register it fully. He stepped into the room, and I felt the air between us grow colder. "I'm going out," he said simply, not meeting my gaze. "I'll be back later." I nodded, the lump in my throat growing tighter. "Where are you going?" My voice was softer than I meant it to be. "I don't know," he said, his tone distant. "I just need some space." The words stung, but I didn't say anything. What was there left to say? I had already said everything I could, and he had made it clear that he wasn't interested in hearing it. I watched him grab his jacket and leave, the sound of the door closing behind him echoing in the silence that followed. I stood there for a while, frozen, as the reality of the situation sank in. He wasn't just physically leaving. He was emotionally gone, too. For the rest of the evening, I did my best to avoid thinking about him. I cleaned the kitchen, then retreated to the bedroom where I sat in the quiet, staring at the walls. I couldn't stop the thoughts from swirling in my mind. What was happening to us? Where had we gone wrong? I couldn't help but wonder if Clara had somehow filled the void that had been left by my own neglect. She was everything I wasn't: caring, attentive, and patient. She was the person Mark needed, the person he deserved. And I couldn't compete with that. I tried to shake the thought from my mind. I couldn't keep comparing myself to her. I had to focus on what I could do. I had to fix things. But how? How could I fix something that seemed so broken? When Mark finally came home, it was late. The house was dark, and I had already gone to bed. I heard him move around in the kitchen, the soft clink of dishes, and the rustle of a bag. Then, the quiet sound of his footsteps coming down the hallway. He paused outside the bedroom door, and I could feel him standing there, as if unsure whether to come in or not. After a long pause, he opened the door slowly and stepped inside. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice soft but uncertain. "I shouldn't have gone out like that." I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to yell, to demand that he explain himself. But another part of me was tired of fighting. Tired of feeling like I was constantly giving and never receiving. Tired of feeling like I was losing him with every passing day. "I just don't understand," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why is it so easy for you to turn to someone else? Why can't you turn to me?" Mark didn't answer right away. He stood there, looking at me with that same expression that had become so familiar, distant, detached. "I don't know," he finally said, his voice barely audible. "I guess I just need someone who understands me." His words hit me harder than anything he had said before. It wasn't that he had found someone who could listen to him, it was that he had found someone who understood him in ways that I never could. And the realization made me feel like I had failed him in the worst possible way. "I don't know how to fix this," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't know how to be what you need anymore." Mark didn't answer, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. He was torn between two worlds, the world of what we had once shared and the world of what he had found with Clara. And I didn't know how to bring him back to me. I didn't know how to make him see that we could still have something if we just tried. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe we were already too far gone. Maybe I had already lost him and there was nothing left to do but let him go. As the night stretched on, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of what had happened and what was to come. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of the end. That no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, Mark would never come back to me. The following days dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. I couldn't escape the crushing weight of the silence that hung between Mark and me. Every interaction felt hollow, every word we exchanged seemed to come from a place of obligation rather than love. I had never felt more distant from him, and I began to question everything, our marriage, our past, and whether it was even worth trying to hold on. Mark didn't come home as often. When he did, he was distracted, his mind elsewhere. I couldn't blame him. Clara had become his escape, the one person who seemed to understand him in a way that I no longer could. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him how much it hurt, but every time I opened my mouth, the words wouldn't come. It was as if the anger and sorrow had become so overwhelming that I was left speechless. The house, once filled with our shared memories, had become a quiet prison. The spaces between us felt like vast chasms. I didn't know how to bridge them, or if I even wanted to anymore. I began to wonder if the love we once had was enough to repair what had been broken, or if it was a fleeting illusion, something we had built together out of convenience and now, like everything else, it was fading away. One evening, I found myself staring at the empty space on the couch where Mark used to sit. I could still remember how we used to laugh together, how we would talk late into the night about everything and nothing. Now, I couldn't even remember the last time we had shared a real conversation. It felt as if I had been living in a dream that was slowly unraveling. As the days passed, I tried to distract myself. I threw myself into work, into meaningless tasks around the house, anything to avoid facing the truth. But the truth was inescapable. The truth was that Mark was slipping further away, and I didn't know how to stop it. I could feel myself starting to resent him, for the way he had pulled away, for the way he had turned to Clara when I had been right there. And yet, at the same time, I still loved him. And that was the cruelest part. One afternoon, after another long day of silence and unspoken tension, Mark came home earlier than usual. I was sitting in the kitchen, staring blankly at a cup of coffee, when he walked in. He looked tired, more so than usual, and there was a heaviness in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a while. He stood in the doorway for a moment, his presence filling the space between us like an invisible wall. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice sounding different. Softer, almost hesitant. I nodded, though I didn't know what to expect. I had been waiting for this moment, waiting for him to say something, anything. But now that he was here, I wasn't sure I was ready for the truth. He took a step forward, sitting down at the table across from me. His hands were clasped together, and he seemed lost in thought for a moment before he spoke again. "I've been thinking a lot," he said quietly. "About everything. About us." I didn't say anything, not trusting myself to speak. I just watched him, waiting for him to continue. "I know I've been distant," he continued, his eyes finally meeting mine. "And I know I've hurt you. I didn't mean to, but I did." I felt a tightness in my chest, a mixture of anger and relief. At least he was acknowledging it. At least he was admitting that he had hurt me. But that didn't change what had happened. It didn't change the way things had unfolded. "I don't know what to say," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I don't know what you expect from me anymore." Mark looked down, his gaze focused on the table as if trying to find the right words. When he finally looked up again, there was a vulnerability in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. "I've been with Clara," he said, his voice barely audible. I nodded, as though I had known this already, as though the truth had been right there in front of me all along. But hearing him say it out loud felt like a punch to the gut. The one thing I had been trying to avoid, the one thing that I couldn't ignore, was finally out in the open. "I know," I said quietly. "I knew. But that doesn't make it easier to hear." Mark's face softened, and he leaned back in his chair, his hands rubbing his face in frustration. "I never meant for it to happen like this. I didn't want to hurt you. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like I was being seen. I don't know how to explain it, but it was like everything I did just didn't matter." The words stung, but I couldn't stop myself from responding. "You think I didn't feel that way too? I was here, doing everything, trying to make this work, trying to be everything for you. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like I mattered. And you didn't even notice." Mark's expression faltered, and for the first time in a long time I saw guilt in his eyes. But it was too little, too late. The damage had been done. "I don't know what to do," he said softly. "I don't know if there's a way back." I looked at him, the weight of everything we had gone through crashing down on me. I loved him, I really did. But love wasn't enough to fix something that had been broken for so long. "I don't think there is," I said quietly. "I don't think we can go back." The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I could feel the finality in my words, the acceptance that things had changed, and they couldn't be undone. We had both failed each other, in ways that couldn't be repaired with a few apologies or promises. After a long moment, Mark stood up from the table, his face a mixture of sadness and resignation. "I don't want to lose you," he said softly, almost as if trying to convince himself. I stood too, wiping a stray tear from my cheek. "I don't want to lose you either. But sometimes, things just aren't meant to be." Mark didn't say anything else. He turned and left the room, and I watched him go, feeling the door closing between us for the final time. In the days that followed, Mark moved out. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was just empty. But I knew, deep down, it was the right thing. For both of us. As the weeks went by, I found myself slowly rebuilding my life. I found comfort in the small things again, in the quiet moments, in rediscovering who I was without him. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't know where my future would lead, but I knew that I had to let go. I had to move forward, and for the first time in a long time, I could see a glimpse of hope. I had been right all along, household chores weren't oppression. They were just distractions. The real oppression was not living your truth, not allowing yourself to be seen, to be heard. And now, I was ready to be seen again. And maybe, just maybe, this time, it would be on my own terms.